Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're setting off on a really profound literary journey, back to 1858. That's when the great American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published a truly stunning piece in his collection, Birds of Passage. The poem is called Haunted Houses, and I am so excited to guide you through it today. You see, Longfellow was an absolute master at crafting verses meant to be read aloud, in our own living rooms, offering up this deep philosophical instruction in a way that just feels so accessible. But, as we're going to see, his take on a haunted house might be wildly different from what you'd expect. So let me ask you, right off the bat, are all houses haunted? I mean, back in the 19th century, literature was completely dominated by Gothic horror tropes, right? When people thought of a haunted house, they were picturing malevolent spirits, decaying old castles, and just pure atmospheric terror. But Longfellow, he completely flips the script on us. He had zero interest in writing some spooky ghost story to give you nightmares. Instead, he introduces a radically different paradigm, asking us to rethink the very spaces we inhabit every single day. He kicks things off with this sweeping universal declaration. He writes, "All houses wherein men have lived and died are haunted houses." Just like that, he redefines the haunted house from a site of absolute horror to this universal and actually quite comforting reality of the human condition. In his framework, every dwelling is haunted simply because our physical spaces act as repositories. They hold the emotional, spiritual, and historical imprints of literally everyone who lived there before us. He even calls these ghosts harmless phantoms, just going about their gentle errands. Okay, let's dive into this. Haunted houses is what we call an elegiac lyric poem, which basically means it's always operating on two distinct layers. On the surface, the literal dimension, it's describing the quiet presence of ancestral spirits just moving through a physical home, down the hallways, through doorways, up the stairs. But the inner meaning, the allegorical depth, is actually this beautiful meditation on human consciousness and civilization. The houses represent human lives, and the ghosts? Well, they represent our lingering memories and historical influences. Section 1. The architecture of the poem: form, meter, and sound. Before we start tracking the specific phantoms walking these halls, we really need to look at how the poem itself is built. Longfellow was incredibly intentional about his architecture. The poem is meticulously organized into 10 quatrains, which are 4-line stanzas, giving us 40 lines total. And this highly predictable, orderly structure actually mirrors the thematic continuity of generations predictably replacing one another inside a home. Plus, it features a strict ABAB cross-rhyme scheme and uses iambic pentameter. That's a 10-syllable rhythm with alternating unstressed and stressed beats. Why does that matter? Because that specific 10-syllable framework closely mimics a human heartbeat. It takes these supernatural themes and makes them feel deeply intimate and profoundly human. On top of that, Longfellow layers in some brilliant sound devices to soften the supernatural vibe. He uses alliteration to give it this hushed rhythmic quality, and assonance, where you draw out those long vowel sounds, to create a slow, melancholic musicality. But my absolute favorite is his use of sibilants. The repetition of the S sound creates this whispering, wind-like effect. Seriously, try saying this line out loud. Sense of something moving to and fro. You can literally hear the hushed, ghostly air moving right through those S sounds. Section 2. The illusion of ownership. Who really owns your home? Now that we've got a feel for the rhythm, let's shift over to the first half of the poem, which honestly asks a pretty uncomfortable question. Who really owns your home? To figure that out, I want you to take a second and personally think about the invisible history of the people who inhabited your space long before you got there. Longfellow perfectly illustrates this by placing two very different figures by a fireside. First, you have the stranger, who represents someone completely bound to the empirical, material world. They look around the room and only see physical reality, just the tangible what is. But then we have the speaker, who possesses this heightened, clairvoyant sensitivity. For the speaker, history is a living reality sitting right on top of the physical world. All that has been is completely visible to them. They understand that we are never truly alone, and that real wisdom comes from recognizing those invisible threads tying the past to the present. Now, what's really interesting here is how Longfellow uses this exact concept to totally shatter our modern arrogance when it comes to property ownership. He writes, "We have no title deeds to house or lands." He's basically arguing that our human legal documents are a complete illusion. The physical possession we brag about, it's just temporary custodianship. Human civilization is quite literally built upon the graves of our ancestors, and those forgotten occupants are still stretching out their dusty hands to maintain their legacy.
To really anchor this philosophy, Longfellow pulls in a very specific 19th century legal term, mortmain. Derived from medieval Latin, it literally translates to dead hand. In law, it refers to the inalienable, perpetual ownership of an estate that simply cannot be transferred. By applying this very real legal concept to the ghosts in our homes, Longfellow is showing us how the dead hand of ancestry continually shapes our modern choices, our culture, and even our geography. We simply can't sever our ties with history.
Section 3. Finding Cosmic Balance, the Macrocosmic View. Right around stanzas 6 through 8, the poem brilliantly pulls back from the domestic sphere, away from the doorways and firesides, and zooms way out into Longfellow's vast macrocosmic view of human existence. He starts contrasting our physical reality directly with the spirit world. Our physical world is described as being clouded by earthly mists and vapors dense. It's a striking metaphor for human confusion, our mortality, and the heavy burden of materialism. But the spirit world? He doesn't depict it as some distant, unreachable heaven. Instead, it's this omnipresent atmosphere that effortlessly wafts right through our thick reality as a vital breath of ethereal air, bringing us essential spiritual nourishment and clarity. When placed against the sheer vastness of eternity, Longfellow refers to our human existence as just little lives. And he highlights that these brief, incredibly fragile lives of ours are actually maintained by a very delicate psychological balance. We are constantly being pulled between conflicting, opposite desires. So the crucial point here is this concept of equipoise. It basically means a state of perfect equilibrium between opposing forces or counterweights. Longfellow views the human experience as a constant, ongoing negotiation between conflicting internal drives. And if we didn't manage to maintain this equipoise, human life would just spiral out into absolute chaos or total disconnected isolation. So what exactly are those opposing forces? Well, Longfellow breaks down the fundamental dualism of human nature. On one hand, we've got the instinct that enjoys. That's our primal drive for immediate pleasure, our earthly wants and carnal desires. On the flip side, we possess the instinct that aspires, which is the noble, elevated yearning of the soul to achieve greatness and connect with something eternal. We are literally always being pulled downward to the earth while simultaneously reaching upward to the heavens. To explain this internal friction, Longfellow actually borrows a really cool concept from 19th century astronomy. Back then, astronomers figured out that unseen planets, like Neptune, existed purely by observing the perturbations or the disturbances in the orbits of the planets they could see. Longfellow uses this to argue that the emotional turbulence or the perpetual jar of our everyday lives isn't just random static, it's undeniable proof of unseen spiritual forces. Just like an unseen star or an undiscovered planet, these forces are silently exerting a gravitational pull on our moral choices and our ultimate destinies. Section 4. The Bridge of Light, connecting the known and unknown. This brings us to the true philosophical climax of our explainer. In the final two stanzas, Longfellow beautifully illustrates the ultimate transcendence available to humanity by looking closely at the boundary between life and death. He starts with this extended simile, painting a breathtaking visual. He describes the moon emerging from a dark cloud, throwing a shimmering, floating pathway of light straight across the ocean water. It's incredibly evocative. He's inviting us to imagine our very own thoughts rushing across this fragile, luminous bridge right into the dark, mysterious night. And this brilliantly illustrates how the poet takes a perfectly natural phenomenon and transforms it into a deeply mystical pathway. The dark gate of cloud represents the obscurity and the heavy limitations of our earthly existence. Then you have the bridge of light, which stands for spiritual intuition and imagination. And finally, the trembling planks of this floating bridge, they perfectly signify the profound fragility and uncertainty of human understanding whenever we try to cross over and grasp the unknown afterlife. Then, in the final stanza, we get the big revelation. So from the world of spirits, there descends a bridge of light, connecting it with this. The bridge isn't just us reaching out into the void. It's a two-way street. But this connection between the living and the dead has an unsteady floor that sways and bends. That means it entirely relies on our subjective faith, our memory, and our imagination, rather than any rigid, observable, scientific laws. The whole vital purpose of this bridge is to let our thoughts wander safely above what Longfellow calls the dark abyss. That abyss represents the truly terrifying prospect of absolute nothingness, despair, and eternal separation. By allowing our thoughts to wander over this swaying bridge of memory and spiritual faith, humanity is essentially protected from falling into total nihilism. we're able to find immense, profound comfort in the eternal and protective presence of the past. Which brings us to a really beautiful, kind of lingering thought to end on. Longfellow taught us that history isn't just something confined to dusty books or forgotten graves. It's a vivid, living reality that shares our personal space every single day. So as you look around the rooms where you live, where you work, and where you sleep, I'll leave you with this final provocative question. Who is quietly walking the halls of your home right now?